afternoon, good morning, good evening to everybody. Welcome to this launch event for the report Net Effects, an evidence-led exploration of the IGF's impact. My name is Emily Taylor, and I'm a founder of the DNS Research Federation. I'm here with my co-authors, Carolina Cairo, Dorothea Giborash, Peter Job, Kieran McCarthy, Georgia Osborne, and Chris Buckridge. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping points. This session is being recorded and will last 1 hour. We will present the report's findings and then open the floor to questions. Please keep muted during the presentation and raise your hand if you'd like to take the floor. We always love to see people's faces, so do keep your camera on if you can, and unmute when I call on you to ask your question. Alternatively, if you'd prefer to use the chat to raise a question, then one of us can read it out. So before we get started, I would like to thank the UK Department for Science, Innovation and Technology for commissioning and funding this study. And it's my pleasure to give the floor to Nigel Hickson, who I very much hope is in the room, to say a few words before we start. Nigel, the floor is yours.
Emily, thank you very much indeed, and I hope you can hear me. Yeah, sorry for the rather dishevelled look. Just taken my hat off, and yeah. No, so my name's Nigel Hickson. I work on internet governance policy at the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology, and it was an absolute pleasure to be able to commission and help fund this important work. We're delighted with the outcome. Let me just say that it's really important to us. The Internet Governance Forum is we think one of the critical bedrocks of the internet governance ecosystem, and we think it has been for a number of years, well, since it was started in 2006. And the national and regional initiatives that complement it are just so incredibly important. So given the debate on the WSIS Plus 20 review process that will take place in the lead up to the UNGA discussions in late 2025, having some evidence on the value of the Internet Governance Forum and the national and regional initiatives is just so important, and we're absolutely delighted with the report. And yeah, and thank the DNS Research Federation for doing such excellent work, and yeah, look forward to this this webinar. And thank you very much indeed for giving me the opportunity to say a few words.
Thank you very much, Nigel. So I will now share my screen. I hope you can see that. And I'll kick off the presentation. So just a reminder, please keep yourself muted and do raise your hand if you would like me to call on you in the Q&A, or use the chat function to make any comments as we go along. Thank you. So as Nigel has mentioned, you know, the debate around the renewal of the mandate of the IGF is expected to become more intense and more contentious, possibly in the forthcoming WSIS 20 process. And the report is intended to explore the ways in which the IGF has generated value, particularly for Global South G77 states. And the approach that we took was an evidence-based one, which I'll come on to in a second. So just to advance the slide. So in summary, you know, what did we find? A lasting and a significant direct and indirect impact globally from the IGF, a crucial connection point for all stakeholders on internet governance issues, the wellspring of an international ecosystem of regional and national IGFs, and also giving a voice to stakeholders, including young stakeholders who might not otherwise find a voice or might struggle to have their concerns and perspectives heard. So the context and objectives, I mentioned that this is an evidence-based approach, and we did that in two ways. First of all, we spoke to people with an internet governance background, and bearing in mind that the UK government asked us to do this study at the very beginning of October, we then scrambled to get to as many people as possible in a very short window of time. We spoke to 48 internet governance experts, and you'll see from the charts there on the left-hand side of the screen that our balance was to try to find voices from the global south, but of course, you know, to hear from everyone, including international organizations as well, and to also to seek a fair balance from the different stakeholder groups, including youth. We also aimed for gender parity. We didn't quite get there, but we had well over 40% of our interviewees were women. And overall, we complemented that qualitative analysis with an automated analysis of more than 1,500 documents, enhanced with AI and machine learning. So that was 12 million words in all, because these documents are not short. They tend to be the transcripts of long 3-hour sessions, for example, whether they be workshops or main sessions. So what do we mean by impact? Well, the report itself goes into quite some detail on this, but we anchored our analysis in the Tunis Agenda, the foundational document for the IGF, and looked at, in all, 6 measures for impact, whether they were issue-driven, engagement-driven, or value-driven. And then in framing our analysis, we really put our findings into 2 buckets. One was direct impact. So if the IGF had a major part to play in the outcome, there was clear evidence that the IGF had directly influenced the outcome that we're talking about. And then there is the more indirect impact. The IGF is part of a large ecosystem, and as issues have evolved, as processes have been started, we looked at how the IGF had a role in playing in the outcome, even if you couldn't say, well, it was absolutely, definitely the IGF and the IGF alone. It's part of the broader ecosystem. So just a couple of closed questions that we started with the interviews. We found here that we were asking people whether they supported the extension of the IGF, and 93% of the interviewees did. And also we asked people whether they could think of at least one example of a useful and relevant policy impact that the IGF had had in their region or for their stakeholder group. And there, 70% of people were able to tell us a story to identify one concrete example of impact. And that led us onto inquiry, which you can read in the report. So I will now hand over to my colleague Carolina Cairo, the lead author on the study, to take us through the direct impact. Carolina.
Wonderful. Thank you, Emily. So starting with our findings, we wanted to first speak to you about those areas where we found that the IGF has had a direct impact. And there were 4 in particular where we were able to see the IGF having that sort of linear direct impact. The first is interconnection. So we saw the IGF played a key role in accompanying the growth of internet exchange points, particularly in Africa and the Caribbean. Second, community connectivity, with the IGF helping unleash enabling regulation in support of community networks. Third, the IGF has enabled the organic growth of national and regional IGFs. And those have gone on to generate all sorts of positive net effects that we'll be describing to you today. And fourth, the IGF has served as an ecosystem for sort of incubating or nurturing the next generation of Global South leaders. So we'll walk you through these 4 areas of impact one by one. So starting with interconnectivity, internet exchange points or IXPs are obviously important because they help improve local internet traffic and reduce costs. And promoting their adoption is especially impactful across the Global South. So in this point, our report found that the IGF contributed to the uptake of IXPs in a number of ways. The IGF helped drive demand, develop regulations, raise funds, and build sort of the required local cooperation for IXPs to develop, particularly in Africa. And here on the screen, we see that in 2007, before these conversations sort of took hold in IGF, there were 12 IXPs across the African continent. And by 2023, there were 53 active IXPs across 47 cities and 36 countries in Africa. Next slide, please. And this second graph tells a little bit the story of how the IGF accomplished that level of influence on the development of IXPs. The graph looks at the extent to which IXPs are discussed in global and regional IGF reports. And what we see with the line in blue is that the global IGF helped raise the issue of interconnection and sort of establish the value brought by internet exchange points. And then the green line shows how in subsequent years, those conversations are continued at the regional level and the local level, where discussions could sort of focus on strategic action and the practicalities of establishing IXPs. Next slide, please. So community connectivity is another area where we see the IGF playing a key role in building momentum and sort of garnering support for a specific solution, in this case, community networks. So the graph here on the screen shows how discussions on community networks first peaked in 2018, 2019, where the community networks movement was able to articulate in the IGF what enabling regulation they needed. And following those conversations, we've seen the adoption of those policy recommendations across multiple countries in Latin America and Africa. For example, Argentina, Bolivia, and Mexico have granted operator licenses to community networks, and Kenya is in the process of supporting community networks with universal service funds. Next slide, please. So the organic growth of national and regional IGF initiatives also emerged as a clear story of impact of the IGF. NRIs, as they're known, have had an outstanding growth, going from just 26 initiatives in 2011 to 162 officially recognized active initiatives in 2023. And you can see here on the screen how NRIs have a strong presence across a good part of the Global South. Next slide, please. So NRIs are a very interesting element of the IGF because they were not mandated by the Tunis agenda, and yet they have proliferated organically. And you can see here on the right their growth, especially of national and youth initiatives. And what makes the NRIs especially impactful is this notion that good governance begins at home, right? So NRIs have shown value in that they translate global conversations to the local level, where implementation is more likely to take place, and where internet governance discussions are shown to impact policy outcomes. Concrete examples include policies to support IXPs and community networks that we just discussed, but there are other examples of NRIs supporting, say, the development of cyber laws in Uganda and helping shape the Arab digital agenda in North Africa and the Middle East. NRIs also positively impact or sort of feedback to the global IGF by enhancing representation from the Global South. We found that 60% of the national IGFs are based in G77 countries. And essentially this, diverse Global South representation positively impacts both discussions and leaderships within IGF as well. And lastly, NRIs, together with the network of schools of internet governance, support capacity building and help develop the knowledge and capacities for local communities to engage effectively at the global IGF. So with that, I'll pass on to Dorothea to speak about the fourth area of impact of the IGF. Dorothea, on to you.
Thank you. As Carolina mentioned, the IGF has enabled the emergence of a community of young leaders from the global south especially, and its commitment to the youth involvement is evident through the youth track and the workshops that integrate youth perspectives at the IGF. Here on the map, you can see countries where youth representatives were interviewed for this study. However, there are many more initiatives worldwide, 42 in total, which contribute to the global discourse on internet governance. The impact of youth involvement manifests in 3 key areas. Firstly, the IGF serves as a catalyst for capacity building and the emergence of the next generation of leaders. Youth participants, particularly from Latin America, Africa, and Asia Pacific, gain deep insights into internet governance issues, where they leverage to initiate educational programs, establish regional youth forums, and advocate for impactful policies in their respective countries. Secondly, youth participants actively shape internet governance discussions and champion issues locally and globally as well. Themes like sustainable development and data protection are consistently advocated for by youth representatives, showcasing the tangible impact of youth involvement in shaping internet governance. And lastly, we found that the IGF fosters an ecosystem of cross-regional collaborations among youth initiatives as well. Moreover, in the form of south-to-south cross-regional collaboration, for example, between Bangladesh and the Democratic Republic of Congo, young leaders collaborate to address common challenges. They also share best practices and secure support for their own initiatives locally. And now I hand over to the next speaker.
Kieran, over to you. Thank you.
Yes, I'm going to talk about the indirect impact the IGF's had, by which we mean the role it's played by pushing or building on or amplifying discussions that have been held in other venues. And there's a whole range in the report, but we picked 3 which are sort of the most interesting or unusual. First is the thematic dynamism, by which we mean kind of the flexibility of the IGF and the fact that it tackles subjects as and when they crop up. Secondly, the discussion of the IANA transition, which I'm sure many of you are aware of, and the role the IGF played in that, making it successful. And then third, we use as an example online harms and the impact that the IGF has had on that topic, broad-ranging topic. It's had a wide range impact in different fora. When it comes to thematic dynamism, if you have a look at this chart, there's 6 that are outlined in a box on the right there. And these are, if you've been to an IGF, you'll recognize these. They're the sort of perennial topics that are sort of baked into the IGF that the MAG always refers to. And it shows basically that the IGF tackles them and tackles them consistently. It goes up and down a little bit occasionally, but they're always there. Those topics are always being discussed. And as the internet evolves, the impact on each of those topics is discussed at the IGF. The interesting aspect, the dynamism, comes in that if you can see topics pop up and disappear again, depending on what's going on at any given time. So if you have a look at, for example, the IANA transition, if you look at the bottom left, that popped up 2016 because that's when the IANA transition was completed. You can see climate change, you can see artificial intelligence. These topics come and go as they're being discussed in the wider internet governance world. And it shows a kind of flexibility, a kind of dynamism, which is a lot sort of faster, more dynamic, more vigorous than you would see in other, usually the sort of international organizational fora that we go to. So that's very valuable. The IGF moves fast and picks up what's going on at any given moment. Next slide. Yeah, so this one is particularly interesting. Well, I talked the Global South perspectives included quite a lot. We found, you can read more in the report, but we found that because they have those perennial issues, a lot of the Global South issues, which have struggle often to be heard in other fora, get included because they put it in workshops or they lead through to main sessions. But the one that we picked out, what I thought was most interesting, was this graph here. And the reason why there's a sudden rocket in discussion of bridging the digital divide, it was a post-pandemic issue. The pandemic caused a huge increase in basic internet access in the Global South. And then subsequent to that, there's been a lot of discussion about how to make that meaningful, how to make that connectivity meaningful, how to close the digital divide. And that graph shows pretty clearly that the IGF has adapted to that reality. Next slide. The IANA transition, which amazingly was started a decade ago now. It doesn't seem that long. For those that have been around in the internet governance world for a long time, you'll remember that this was kind of the topic for a long time. And in 2014, the US government said it would transition. It happened in 2016. But as you can see from that graph, there was a huge increase in discussions in 2014. 2015 is when the plans were drawn up, more or less, and then 2016 is when it was implemented. And the IGF responded accordingly. There was a lot of sessions had. Now, the interesting thing, hopefully while I've been talking, you've been reading some of the quotes on the left-hand side, is the people that we spoke to, and we spoke to quite a lot, they were all talk quite effusively about the role that the IGF had played in making that happen. It had been a place where people were able to discuss things, they were able to put out ideas, where they were able to get feelers of how to do this, because at the time, no one was sure this was going to be particularly successful. No one was quite sure how we would end up doing it. And the people that were, some who were deeply involved in this, said the IGF played a critical role in socializing those ideas, in getting them accepted, in understanding what model to go for, and then accepting that model. And then if you have a look, why this graph is quite interesting, is it hits 2017, and IANA transition has not been discussed since. And I think we can all pretty much agree the IANA transition was surprisingly effective. It hasn't been an issue since. And it hasn't been an issue, and that's reflected in the fact that the IGF hasn't discussed it. We had a whole bunch of discussions in 2016 about how it was going and how it was a good example, and now we're done. So the IGF in that sense has reflected what happened in the wider world. Next slide, please. Online harms is obviously a fairly broad topic. We used the textual analysis to sort of pull in a lot of different aspects, and you can see as society, we are all dealing with online harms in many different ways, but you can see peaks and troughs and the fact that it's increasing there. And there's some quotes on the left you can see from people drawing out specific issues. There was the Christchurch call to action, if you recall. There was a terrorist incident in New Zealand where it was specifically designed to go viral, and that caused a pretty extensive global call for how we deal with that in future. And the IGF played a really quite an important role in that. There was, it was the big annual meeting where a lot of people who knew a lot about internet governance gathered together and talked about, well, how do we realistically deal with this? Likewise, fake news, again, became a very big topic. You can see these peaks in the chart, if you recall. 2020, that peak there was the Christchurch call to action. 2021, 2022, fake news. And a lot of people, well, we use the example here of Brazil. Brazil came up with some legislation with respect to fake news. And a lot of that was discussed at the IGF prior. Likewise, where we are right now, particularly in Europe, with dealing with online harms, again, a lot of those conversations have been had or started or built within the IGF, and that has led through to legislation and follow through across the world. Next slide, please. Oh, that's the end of my part. And then I'll hand over to Georgia.
We did a deep dive into the participation of the IGF as part of the project, particularly focusing on the participation of the Global South here. And here are some of our key findings. So the first thing to say here is looking at the graph on the right-hand side, it has grown in participation since 2016. And you can see the drop in 2020 to 2022. So this is during the height of the years of the COVID-19 pandemic. And then you can see in 2023, a rapid recovery of on-site participation in 2023 in Kyoto, with more than 6,000 in-person attendees. Another key finding from the stats were that 50 to 60% of attendees were newcomers, showing it's an encouraging forum for newcomers, which kind of goes to Kieran's point about it being dynamic and the dynamism of it. So the other thing to say is that the participation of the IGF shows diversity in terms of gender, with more than 40% women attending, and diversity in terms of geography, with participation of 178 countries in 2023. Next slide, yeah. In terms of encouraging geographically diverse participation, we found that perhaps unsurprisingly, where the IGF was located, participation of that region was increased. So the location of the IGF does matter in terms of the participation of that IGF. And you can see in this graph here that each regional group and the location showing the correlation between high participation of that region of where it was located. And next slide, please. I'll pass over to Chris.
All right. Thank you very much. Yeah, I have a couple of areas here to look at, the world without IGF and opportunities to evolve. Next slide, please. So yeah, in these interviews that we were doing, towards the end of the interview, we tend to ask the interviewees to contemplate a world without the IGF. And what they might miss about it, what they think the world would miss absent an IGF. And it produced a lot of different responses. And I think we note in the report sometimes quite emotional responses from people. But looking at what they actually told us, I think the answers are very much in line with what we've seen and discussed as the impacts, both direct and indirect. The learning from each other and being inspired by other people is something that people felt very strongly would be missed, and that if we didn't have the IGF there would really be a significant reduction in the sort of broader understanding of these issues, of the impact that they can have on people, the impact they can have on people from different parts of the world. And that would be a very significant loss. The global dialogue and cooperation, I think, was felt as this is a really important venue and unique venue in many ways to bring together a lot of different types of stakeholders to build new cooperative practices, initiatives, ideas, and that would be very sorely missed. And then the breadth and impact of policy discourse. So I think the idea that the IGF is so broad, it is responsive, as Kieran was saying, to new issues, different issues, was actually really highly valued by a lot of people. And I think what we also heard, and this is what we saw in both the direct and indirect impacts, is that breadth and that sort of consideration of different issues really is instrumental in shaping some of the digital policies that have emerged in the last decade at the national level, but also regional level as well. So we have a quote here, and I think actually there were probably a few people who said this in something like the same words, but it's that if the IGF didn't already exist, we'd have to invent it. And I think going into the WSIS Plus 20 review discussions, that's probably something that was playing on people's minds. But it also raises the question of, if we had to reinvent the IGF, what would the IGF look like? And that's a good segue to the next slide, please, which is opportunities to improve. And so certainly there was not the idea from the people we spoke to that the IGF was a static institution, or that it was an institution that was perfect in any way. That there was obviously scope for continued improvement. Now, again, these are, I think, are not super surprising areas that people have picked out. The greater global representation and diversity is very important, and is something that was raised by various people. I think the efforts, pardon me, the efforts that have been made to make it more inclusive, to reach out to different communities, were acknowledged, but there is still work to do there in building on that diversity and that representation. More effective capture of discussions, I think, was something that was clear. I mean, the work that we've done in relation to this study is going and trying to collect a lot of analyze a lot of what's been discussed there. But I think there is a sense that there is a need to more effectively capture, more effectively share, distribute, disseminate the discussions and the insights and learnings that come from an IGF. Also, in terms of being able to better understand and improve the IGF's role in the overall internet governance ecosystem by being able to talk about what has been achieved and discussed at an IGF. Improved curation and ongoing innovation in meeting design. I think this is something that people are looking for, to see the sort of the meeting approaches evolve and improve over time, but notably to not lose the flexibility that has been a sort of hallmark of the IGF over the years. And then the final one here is greater political weight given to the outcomes. And this is sort of building on that idea that there is a great accumulation of thought, of understanding, knowledge, and expert opinion that has been gathered and is gathered through these IGF events. But the outcomes, the sort of the learnings there are often not properly examined and distributed to other institutions and to policymakers. And so ensuring through different processes that happens more effectively is an area that was identified as an opportunity to evolve. And I think I'm handing back to Emily at this point.
Thank you very much, Chris, and thank you to all of the co-authors who've taken us through the findings of the report. So just to summarise what we found, very strong evidence that the IGF has impact, has value, and that the example that Kieran took us through on the IANA transition, when the IGF was set up after the first World Summit on the Information Society in 2003 to 2005, internet governance was a highly contentious issue at that time. It kind of sucked the oxygen out of the air during the WSIS process. But the IGF contributed to an inclusive and constructive dialogue about what to do. And part of that comes from its diversity in stakeholder and regional perspectives, and the way that those perspectives are bound into the agenda, particularly Global South and youth participation is strong. And the specific examples of direct impact that we've been speaking to today is the growth of internet exchange points in Africa, where the people involved described the journey that they had of going to an IGF, hearing that there were these things called internet exchange points, which could contribute to lower latency, lower costs, higher speed of delivery. And they went back into Africa and made those internet exchange points. Similarly, community networks. And it's fascinating seeing the interplay between the global and national IGFs and regional IGFs in this way, that you see a lot of activity in community networks in Latin America, and then they kind of hop across via the global IGF and land again in Africa, where there are similar sort of frameworks for the licensing of community networks, those networks that occur in places where it is not particularly a commercial, attractive proposition to create those networks. Likewise, the national and regional IGFs are really something extraordinary to see. They were never envisioned or mandated by the Tunis agenda, and yet here they are. And similarly, the youth movement within the IGF, and particularly in comparison with other multi-stakeholder internet governance processes, where there are very generous youth and similar programs. But what we see in the IGF is a very successful integration of young voices into the mainstream agenda in ways that we haven't really seen across other processes. And then as we heard as well, the thematic dynamism, it's usually the venue where things are discussed first when they appear. And it's also quick to drop topics when they are no longer contentious, when they no longer require or demand that global engagement. So I will just finally say thank you to you all for joining today, for your attention. You can download the full report on our website, and there is the link. And also a last thank you to the UK Department for Science, Innovation and Technology for funding this study, and also Nigel for your support and your colleagues' support throughout the process. So I will leave it there. I'll stop sharing my screen and welcome your questions and comments, please raise your hand if you would like to take the floor. Do take your camera off so that we can see each other if it's possible. Yes, who would like to be first to raise a question or make a comment? Is there anything from the chat room that we can go to? Chris, thank you.
Sorry, I just want to get things rolling here. No, I wanted to note one of the points that Nigel made actually earlier in the chat, where we're talking about the direct impacts and noting that in relation to community networks, and I think also IXPs, ISOC, obviously, the Internet Society deserves a huge amount of credit for the work there, and obviously also the local communities. And I think that's not, I think that's an important point to draw out in terms of this is not saying the IGF is responsible. It's saying that the IGF existed as a very important tool that could be used by the Internet Society, by local communities, by other entities in trying to affect these changes. So I think it's important not to take away any of the credit from those doing the work, but I think we can also identify that the IGF has been a really important tool in the toolbox for that.
Thank you very much for that comment, Chris, and also thank you for getting the ball rolling, because now I'm seeing two people with their hands up. I've got Adam and then Mark Carvel, and then I have Gabenga. I hope I've pronounced your name correctly. So yes, please go ahead, Adam. The floor is yours.
Hello, thank you very much for doing this, Emily and team. It's as someone who's been involved for quite a long time, it's important work and very timely work. And from today's discussion, clearly it's very good work. So thank you. So you've looked at the IGF as sort of value generation, and something I've thought of, and I think others have discussed, is how discussions at the IGF are part of a thread of dialogue that happens across the ecosystem, for want of a better word, ecosystem. An example I'm thinking of, and may have mentioned before to you, is a discussion that took place at the IGF, I think in 2013. At the time, there was a lot of work going on around principles of internet governance. What is good in internet governance? And Wolfgang Kleinvector organized a main session where he brought together, I think it was around 25 different statements and principles documents that had been organized by and arranged by groups such as the African Union, civil society organizations, OECD, etc. And that was useful, and that became part of the discussion that we used to shape Net Mondiale in April of 2014. So it informed a discussion that began in the IGF, informed another international activity, multi-stakeholder activity, and the outcome documents of the Net Mondiale. You can see a thread that passes through that. And then the starting document for the already mentioned IANA transition, the chair of the accountability and transparency work that was taking place, his starting document was the Net Mondiale document. So what we're seeing is not something that takes place in isolation. The IGF is a place where ideas are generated, where work is an outcome. And I think this is an important part that, and sometimes it's why it's hard to identify the outcomes, as it were, the benefits as you're doing in your report. But it's important to note that there's an incredible value in this. And yeah, thank you very much for doing the work. Look forward to reading the report. Thanks.
Thank you, Adam. And you're drawing out a similar point to Chris's, that these multi-stakeholder processes do not occur in isolation, but they kind of feed off each other. Chris gave the example of the Internet Society, and you've given that example of Net Mondiale. So thank you very much for that. Mark Carvel, welcome, and thank you. Please take the floor.
Well, thank you very much, Emily, and thank you everybody who's been presenting the main conclusions in the report, which I also look forward very much to reading, having followed the IGF very much from the early days, and and now I'm participating as an advisor for two sort of offshoots. Well, Eurodig was not really an offshoot, but it was one of the earliest regional IGFs to follow on from the model of the global IGF, and of course it's still going strong. Next Eurodig meeting will be in Vilnius in June. And then secondly, I'm a policy advisor for Dynamic Coalition, and actually that's really the sort of link to the point I want to make, because we've seen the IGF go from strength to strength as an annual forum for stakeholders from all regions to contribute, and the analysis of participation is very interesting indeed, that you've just provided. But we've also seen the expansion of activities in the intersessional period between annual IGF events, and some of these are quite focused activities that kind of pick up elements of dialogue in the forum and gravitate to some sort of specific course of action and ambition to develop concrete outcomes. And we've seen a lot of discussion, of course, in recent years about the evolution of the IGF to be much more outcome orientated, and we do have these mechanisms intersessionally for activities that are geared to outcomes, and the Dynamic Coalition I'm involved in on cybersecurity standards called ISVC. We're very much geared to producing policy recommendations and toolkits and guidance with regard to implementing cybersecurity standards, which have been existing standards which have been developed by the SDOs, implementing them more effectively so that we create a safer and more secure world online. And if you look at the current list of dynamic coalitions, for example, well, it's expanding in diversity and range of issues to almost 30 dynamic coalitions. So I think this, maybe your report covers this, but I haven't heard mention of it so far. I think this is an important aspect of the evolution of the IGF, which demonstrates its agility and its ability to bring together experts from a wide range of areas of experience into a focused, ongoing, year-round activity. And I think this is an enhancement of the IGF model, which demonstrates really to those skeptics who think the IGF is purely a talk shop, that actually there are triggers and mechanisms for specific activity that lead to outcomes and influence, material influence, through the work of dynamic coalitions and also the policy networks through a new configuration, relatively new configuration of intersessional activity, launched by the IGF and the best practice fora. Again, the best practice fora are examples of how issues shift and change, and then the roster of best practice forums changes in reflection to areas of emphasis and new emerging issues. So I hope those comments are helpful.
That's very, very helpful, Mark. Thank you for that. And I think you raised two really important points: the value of intersessional work as sort of, the IGF not being a one-off event once a year, but the sort of the way that the work in the regional and national IGFs intersessionally sort of combine to sort of make a movement. And also the important role of dynamic coalitions, and particularly we were highlighting dynamic coalitions and policy networks that are very focused, as you mentioned. You mentioned a dynamic coalition on looking at standards, but there are dynamic coalitions focusing on specific issues, and they can really bring forward the work, as you said. So I've got 3 people waiting in the queue. Thank you for your patience. And please do continue to raise your hand if you would like to take the floor. Oh, thank you. I've got another. So I have got Gebenga, then Anna, then Carol Roach, and then Isra. So please go ahead, Gabenga, and thank you very much for your comment.
All right, thank you so much. Three quick things from me. Number one is personal. I know that I've heard a lot of people say that the IGF is a talk shop, but as someone who was starting out his career in 2004, the talk shop was a learning session for me. Every time there was a talk shop or a workshop, I was in training and I was learning. And I have also found out now that I work at Paradigm Initiative, I've also learned that many other people come there to learn, especially the young people and others who would otherwise not have access to such diverse multi-stakeholder gathering. The second point is that my work as a non-profit leader in Paradigm Initiative means that platforms like the IGF provide a unique opportunity for us to launch either reports or projects or initiatives that need global attention. And when I say global attention, I mean real global attention, because the IGF, thankfully, is not just multi-stakeholder. Wherever the IGF is, and thankfully the IGF has been in the global north or the global south, it means that you have diverse people in the room who can get information about what you're sharing. And also, I serve as a member of the IGF leadership panel, and these are the conversations that we have been having, especially about the role of NRIs, about the role of various stakeholders who have enjoyed the platform of the IGF and have also contributed. And I just want to say thank you, for this report, for bubbling the things that people have been saying over the last few years, to the surface. We definitely recommend an extension of the IGF mandate. But beyond that, we believe that right now, as we have these conversations, we have a unique opportunity to strengthen the IGF, to make sure that it is well-funded, to make sure that the participation is truly global and remains global, and that the multi-stakeholder model that allows all partners to be equal around the table, either they are governments or businesses or civil society or the academia or researchers or technical community, that continues to happen. Thank you.
Very much, Gabenga, for those great points, and particularly the value of the IGF to newcomers, which really came through a lot in our interviews, and delighted to hear you reflect that, and also the opportunity to launch projects that require global attention. Anna Nevesh, lovely to see you, and thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Emily.
It's a little bit hard to hear you, Anna. I think.
Sorry. I think it's maximum here.
That's a little better.
Hearing me well? Better?
Yes.
Okay, we'll speak louder. So I'd like to thank you, Emily, and the whole team for this great work. And we need more reports like these ones to go forward with this very important discussion. I would like to highlight the work of MAT, and I would like to highlight the maturity of MAT, because it's really where we have developed with developing countries, we're working together with the least developed countries. I hesitate to use the global south, because it's concept that it's not used in the United Nations yet, and it has a.
Anna, I'm really sorry. It's very hard to hear you. Do you think you could adjust your microphone? What I might do, if it's okay with you, is to ask Carol to make her intervention and then come back to you once you've had a chance to. It may be that you need to change your mic, or maybe you're using wireless headset or something like that. So
I will try. Yes, absolutely.
I'll go to Carol next, and then I'll come back to you, Anna. Thank you. And I can also see Giacomo with your hand raised.
I was muted. I think I was muted.
I think. Well, let's go to Carol, and then I'll come back to you. Thank you. Carol, thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this great report. I smiled through reading it. It really reflected the IGF and the work of the IGF. It shows that we are agile and relevant, and we help states to transform by the information we give. As Benga said, a lot of times people want to learn, they're interested in in finding out these things. A lot of times people want to run from things that they perceive as just pure technology, and then they come and they learn and they say, hey, this really is affecting me on the ground as a human. I like that that you said that we don't shy away from the tough topics, and we're very cognizant of that when we discuss them. The meetings become heated, and the topics are well thought through. I also like that the report strongly highlights the NRIs and the DCs. They really are champions for year-round activities, and they work very hard. So we're more than just a talk shop. The NRIs and the DCs, they're the ones who take our talk and put it into action on the ground. Also, I like that you show that the numbers from year to year, besides the pandemic, shows that we are relevant. And I'm going to support Benga in saying that we hope that people see this relevance, see that the work that we're doing very useful, and to continue to support not only verbally, but also financially, so that we can continue the work. Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you very much, Carol. Anna, shall we try you again? And just a time check, we've just got over 5 minutes. So if I can please ask our last three speakers to
So
be,
are you hearing me or not?
Beautifully, yes.
Okay. So I will use only 1 minute because I wasted the time already. So I just would like to highlight the very good work from MAC. So MAC being composed by developing and developed countries and developed countries as well, is a very important asset here. And it's a truly multi-stakeholder forum, MAC, in the IGF. And it should be really shared and extensively disseminated how MAC works and how it's possible to achieve an IGF. On the right, of course, they are the champions of the IGF. And I just would like to say that this report should be disseminated by governments and by the private sector, and by private sector, not only meaning of tech companies, but all the others that use internet nowadays. And this work has to be done because we are missing governments in the discussion, and we are missing here in the discussion. Thank you very much, and great work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to pass straight on to Isra and then Giacomo, and then I will just say a few words to close the meeting. But thank you very much. Isra, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is Isra Rosas from the Internet Society. I welcome very much the launch of this report. I think it's always positive to have this kind of resources to inform the public debate. And this is joining a group of thoughtful resources like the one Chris just published in favor of the multi-stakeholder model. And building on what others mentioned, I'm really interested in reading how the intersectional activities are analyzed, because they're an essential element that demonstrate the IGF's ability to evolve to accommodate the community's need. And that ability to evolve is fundamental in a vision for the future of the IGF. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Giacomo.
Yes, thank you to you. I think that talk shop is not an offensive definition. I don't mind if IGF is called a talk shop, because I remember that there are talk shops that are the only place where people gathers and at a certain point become relevant because it's the only place where all the voices can be heard. So we need to put in evidence this strength of the IGF. I hope reading the report and listening to what you anticipated, seems this will happen, that we underline the potentiality that the IGF has, and some demonstration proved that is possible, in creating the place where all the stakeholders can find themselves and have a clear and transparent conversation looking for common solutions. So thank you very much for this that wrote the report and this that made it possible, namely to Emily and to Nigel and all the others. And I'm eager to read it to find ideas for the next steps. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, all of you. And thank you also for the comments and questions in the chat. There were too many to read out, but one I just wanted to highlight from Yanis Karklins about the importance of the IGF reaching beyond the technical community as a very important sort of note for further evolution of the IGF and ensuring that it gains the traction and impact that it deserves. So with that, I would just like to say my thanks to the wonderful team at the DNS Research Federation who've pulled together this rapid study, who you heard from today, and also to DSIT for supporting this project, but also all of the people who contributed to the interviews. Many of you are on the call today, many of you aren't. But we learned so much and it was such a pleasure talking to you all, and that really informed our approach and the evidence-driven report itself. So we've put the report link in the chat. You can find it there. You can also find it on our website. It's on the front page today. So enjoy reading. We will enjoy listening to your feedback, and please stay in touch. Thank you very much for joining this call today. We have recorded it and we will share the slides and the recording after the event. So thank you very much. I'm going to close the meeting now.